Hello. Well, thanks very much for coming along to this event run by the Radical Independence Campaign on the Southside of Glasgow. And it's all geared towards your questions about independence. So we have a panel of experts, campaigners. I am your left-wing Asian version of Jonathan Dilbleby today. So hopefully I'll be able to manage all your questions. We do have some that have already come in. There is also going to be a roving mic throughout the event as well. So what we've done is we've split it into a few different sections. The first section is going to be on, are we too wee? Are we too small a country to survive independently? But before we get stuck into the questions, I'm going to ask each of the panellists, starting from the right-hand side here, just to introduce themselves, tell you their name and what they do and where they're coming from in the independence debate. So we just start here.
Hi, my name is Linda Williamson and I'm part of the team that's responsible for Newsnet Scotland, the website that is pro-independence, so I'm coming from a pro-independence point of view.
Hello everybody, my name is Michael Gray. I'm a writer and recently graduated student from Glasgow. I've done a bit of writing with National Collective and Business for Scotland.
And I'm Mary Lockhart. I was in complete obscurity as the chair of a party that nobody in Scotland or anywhere else had heard of, the Scottish Co-operative Party, until I wrote a piece in Scotland on Sunday saying that I was voting yes for independence, whereupon fame and fortune descended and various kinds of ordure hit the fan.
My name's Peter Romand. I'm a campaigner with the Radical Independence Campaign, and I've just finished writing a book on Scottish independence, which is coming out next year.
My name's Shona McAlpine. I'm here representing Women for Independence, which is a campaign group. Although I'm obviously a woman and for independence, I'm not speaking for every single woman in Scotland, although I should be. Thank you.
Okay, so what we're going to do is I've got a section of questions here that have already been handed in, but also with the question they have put on a scale of 1 to 10 of where they are with the independence debate so far. So that should hopefully give us a good gauge throughout the night. There is a roaming mic, so from time to time, if you want to ask something, if you want to come back on something with a further question, then please do put your hand up and I will try my best to fit people in. So I'm going to start with the first question. This comes from Tommy Herbert, who asks, if we keep the pound, will our relationship with England be like Greece's relationship with Germany? So I'm going to start off just by asking Michael to say a few words.
I'm guessing this is because Jonathan presumes I have some kind of economic competency, and I don't. But then if you look at the state of the UK economy, no one really needs much economic competence to run it, so it's all relative. To answer the question, it's a completely different scenario within the UK market because the economic system's far more integrated here. The difference between Germany and Greece was in terms of their manufacturing and in terms of their outputs and in terms of their fiscal deficits. So there was a much larger gap there, and the fact that Greece was let into the Eurozone on kind of false premise and false accounting. So that example, which is often given within the independence debate, isn't as relevant as it first seems. Like, Scotland has a lower deficit than the UK as a whole. Scotland has a trading surplus. Scotland is ahead in terms of its taxation input. And if you look at it in last year's GERS figures, Scotland generated 9.9% of the UK's total tax revenue and was only given 9.3% of the UK's total spending. So irrespective of the nature of a currency arrangement that will be arranged after independence, Scotland is in a very strong economic position going forward, and that's the main point to understand within the economic debate.
Well, to answer the question, I haven't a clue, and therefore I can't answer quite that question. However, it seems to me that one of the most exciting things about the prospect of Scotland becoming an independent nation is that it will not be the same. Its relationships will not mirror the relationships between any other two countries, because the people of Scotland may actually decide on a rather different way of raising taxes and distributing wealth. So with the redistribution of power, which is inevitable when Scotland becomes a new country, will also come a new system of channeling income into the state, a different kind of state. So I don't think it's going to relate at all to the relationship between Greece and Germany. On the issue of currency, I know that the SNP's current position is to retain the sterling. I was quite interested in the recent report which said that it might actually be in Scotland's interest not to do that, or certainly not in the long term, but to establish its own currency. Thank you.
I mean, one of the key questions, of course, facing us all just now is the question of the economic crisis, which is not just affecting us here in Scotland, but globally. Pete, I mean, have you got any views on how that would relate to the independence debate?
Well, in relation to the question on, for example, the relationship between Greece and Germany and Scotland and the rest of UK under independence in terms of a general currency zone, I think there's a couple of things to say. Firstly, it wouldn't be like the relationship between Germany and Greece. The reason being that there is a massive disparity between the economic capacities of Germany and Greece. That is not the same as between Scotland and the rest of the UK. So on that level, it certainly wouldn't be exactly the same type of relationship. One recent study, which was published only a couple of weeks ago, suggests that under independence, if Scotland obtained independence tomorrow, it would be the 6th richest OECD country, whereas the UK would be the 15th. So I think from that alone you can see that clearly Scotland's economy is not the same as Greece's in comparison to Germany. So on that level, no, I don't think the comparison holds. Having said that, I do think that we do need to have a debate about currency. I personally don't favour retaining a currency zone with the UK. I'm not in favour of retaining the sterling. Now, there's a simple reason for that. At the end of the day, Scotland's economy currently is 10% of the overall UK economy. That's not to say it's weaker and so on. We've got 10% of the population, but it is smaller. Now, in my opinion, if we retain the sterling currency, we will not have the same degree of flexibility with the economic policies we want to pursue. Now, in my opinion, one of the reasons that I support independence is because I would like to see a Scotland in which we start to redistribute income and wealth. I think that the UK is a massively unequal society, one of the most unequal in the UK, and we need to utilise every single lever that we have in order to maximise redistribution. We need to be able to enact radical policies, in my opinion. So on that basis, I would say that while it wouldn't be, if we retain the sterling zone, a relationship akin to Germany and Greece, I don't support retaining the sterling zone, and I think that within the independence movement we need to have a debate about what sort of independent Scotland we want to see. Personally, I want to see one where we have the maximum flexibility so that we can pursue radical policies.
Okay, and one of the things that I would just also like to bring in here as well is that as a result of the austerity measures, that one of the hardest hit sections of society is women. And just thinking about how that relates to the independence question and the economic debate around it, just you want to say a few words just about that?
Well, to be absolutely honest, anything I was going to say, everyone's already said. So I really actually don't have anything to add to that. Sorry.
I think for the currency thing, retaining sterling when we first become independent to me seems quite sensible. I think the question is for how long we retain that. As long as it is good for our economy, when the two economies are quite similar with each other, but once we become an independent country and we do things differently, then at that point our economies may diverge, and then to me there's no longer any sense in retaining sterling. So I think it's about the length of time. I can see it as a short to medium term solution, but not a long term solution.
Okay, now I'm going to move on to the next question. As I say, do put your hand up as well if you've got anything that you want to ask our panel. The next question from Ian Leake: should an independent Scotland abolish the Tory anti-trade union laws? This, of course, is one of the, I would suppose, one of the central reasons that we set up the campaign, that we could put forward these kind of ideas. But I'll just pass it over to Mary again, just to any thoughts on how we would approach that?
Well, there's a word I like, and it's yes. Yes, and in early course. The anti-trade union laws have actually, you know, people from my parties, because I'm also a member of the Labour Party, talk about how splitting up the United Kingdom and separating its component parts will divide the working class. Nothing, in my opinion, has more divided the working class than the trade union laws, which mean that people who have the same employer cannot support each other in industrial action. And that's just one part of these pieces of trade union legislation. I think they're wicked, and I think that an independent Scotland would do very well to abolish them. Thank you.
Michael, will independence, in your view, break solidarity between workers in England and Scotland?
No, because solidarity is international. But to go to the question about the trade union laws, I think the Commonwealth's been doing a great job on issues like this with the Jimmy Reid Foundation, thinking about these questions within a slightly different context. Like, they're not just anti-trade union laws, in a way they're actually anti-business as well, because inequality is anti-business. Like, if you're a small or medium-sized business owner in this country, the last thing you want is more austerity. The last thing you want is for your workers to have a lack of bargaining power, because that's what's kept wages down in Scotland and the UK. And as long as wages are low, demand will be low. So that's just the point I wanted to add, that it's not just about making workers better off, but it actually makes everyone better off.
Okay, can I just intervene at this point? Is there anyone in the room that would like to just ask a question? We do have a roving mic, or even just make a comment if it's not a question directly. Anyone at all? Okay, think of some. Oh, we got one here. Yep.
Hello. Well, I'll just shout. Mine was the first question, and I'm trying to work out how much of the assumptions you guys, like a couple of you were saying how rich Scotland's going to be after independence, and I wonder how much that depends on it still being before the oil runs out.
Okay, well that kind of actually fits into our next question, which is about the financing of public sector. There's a question come in from Nicola Crawford, who's a public sector worker, asking if an independent Scotland that lowers corporation tax, how will we pay for our public services? How do you think we could go about raising money for public services? I'll just start with Shona on this question.
In which case I have no answer to that one. How do I this is not where I'm an expert on, to be absolutely honest, so I'll pass over.
I mean, what sort of ways do you think that we would want to raise money for public services? I mean, obviously one of the things that we can look at is the question of... I
think if we are actually going to collect our corporation tax, that will go a long way. Because it's all right having a big high rate of corporation tax. If you're not collecting it, what good is that to anybody?
Okay, Pete?
I think there's a lot of possibilities for raising revenues for increased public spending. To answer your question directly, how much of it is related to the question of oil? Well, I wouldn't say that the answers are directly, necessarily, completely linked to oil, but oil is, of course, a massive consideration. Now, where are we, ultimately, with oil? Because a lot of media sources attempt to downplay how much reserves we have left. Now, at the moment, it's estimated that there are 24 billion barrels worth of oil left in the North Sea. That, according to current rates, would derive around about £1 trillion worth of revenue. Now, that is before further exploration and so on goes on. There is potential for more to be found. Now, basically, that 1 trillion figure is based upon an estimate that we'll gain 30% of revenue from that. So, you know, the companies will extract the oil, they'll take a large chunk of the profit, and we get 30% back. Now, that's incidentally based on estimates of $110 per barrel of oil, which is quite a conservative estimate, actually. The OECD, for example, estimates it's around $150 per barrel. Now, the question I want to raise, though, is this. It's about ownership of oil. It's about more than just oil. It's about who owns the oil. One economist has released a report which says that if we nationalised oil, actually we could triple the revenues. Now, I think we've got to put that question on the table. If nationalisation's a possibility, and it certainly is a possibility, and we could triple revenues from oil as a result of that, then why wouldn't we do that? Now, having said that, I think we should also throw in the caveat that I don't think oil alone is any way to base our economy for the long run. We clearly have to think about the future. But given the fact that Scotland has 25% of green energy potential in Europe, I think we're very well placed to use oil revenues directly to invest in green technologies. I think we need a Green New Deal There was a Caroline Lucas MP from the Green Party and Larry Elliott, the economics editor of The Guardian, produced an excellent paper calling for a Green New Deal, which would involve £50 billion worth of expenditure, this is talking about the UK, for example, per year, and ultimately it didn't even get a hearing at all on a UK level. Now, I think in Scotland, we have a chance to actually really put that on the table. What would a Green New Deal look like? Can we reorientate the economy into developing green technology and actually creating hundreds of thousands of green jobs? Why shouldn't it be the case that every person in Scotland should be, in the future, entitled to a job in the green sector?
Okay, Mary.
Well, Pete's a real thunder stealer. However, really, in part to continue and expand a bit on what he's already begun, because I agree with him 100%, I don't think that we should reduce corporation tax. I think that we should retain it at the current level and set aside a proportion of it in order to invest in developing some of the research that we've already undertaken and expanding in the manufacture of some of the things we've invented. For instance, in the energy sector alone, the most up-to-date ground source heat pump was actually invented and developed here in this city, in Glasgow. There was insufficient money to invest in its manufacture. It was bought up by Spain, and the Spaniards are generating millions every year by selling a Scottish invention which they manufacture and produce, and actually it's providing heat for Buckingham Palace amongst other places. So in terms of tax and raising revenue to fund public services, I do agree largely about the nationalisation point. I think it's outrageous that in the UK we're actually paying subsidies to companies that are making profits for shareholders. And I think we should look very carefully at that, and that everything that we do is not subsidy but investment, and that itself generates the revenue. We pay a living wage for jobs. People pay tax in Scotland, all people and all corporations, and it's collected effectively and efficiently, and it's invested in the best public services in the world.
Could I just add that when we're going to put all this money that we're going to put into renewable energy, that we've also got to look at microgeneration. We should have locally owned microgeneration of green energy, and we've got to put money into that as well.
Yeah, I was just going to draw an interesting contrast here on tax, because there's two things happening right now. One thing is this really exciting debate, which has drawn all these people here tonight in Scotland thinking about these new ideas that the panel has just proposed. But of course, there's another really worrying thing happening at the moment in terms of taxation and like standards of living in public services. And that's the race to the bottom in tax and standards that's been exemplified today by David Cameron, talking about basically doing away with housing support for those under 25. So I think it's worth drawing a contrast with that because of how that kind of exemplifies how important this discussion is. Like, there's an opportunity here democratically to go in a different direction from something that's basically going to be imposed on the people here, unless we take this chance and think about it.
Okay, I'm going to ask some people from the audience now. I've got one over here, if it's behind that sort of pillar thing there. Any more hands? Anyone want anything at all to ask? I'll come to you next. I'm going to take a series of questions now and then allow the panel to make some comments.
Can I ask two interrelated questions? In an independent Scotland, will we tax the rich till the pipsqueak? And secondly, in an independent Scotland, will we get rid of the attack on the poor, all the various welfare tax, the bedroom tax, a whole lot of it? And it was good to see in Manchester, Mary with the banner.
Okay, and another question in here, and then I'll bring the panel back in after.
My understanding is that the Church of Scotland is already pushing to be the established church for an independent Scotland. So this is a two-phase question. Does the panel want an unwritten constitution or a written constitution, and will that be a secular constitution or one with an established church?
Okay, I'll have time for some more questions after this. I'm going to let the panel come back now. So, Pete, should we tax the rich till the pips squeak? And what about the welfare reforms that the Tories are putting through? What's your views on that?
Certainly, I do think we need to increase taxation on the rich. At the moment, we live in a highly inequitable society. I mean, it's unbelievable that at the moment, the UK is the 4th most unequal society in Europe. The only ones less equal than us are Greece, Italy, and Spain, which are all crisis-ridden, which, when you think about it, puts us in a pretty poor position right now. The one way to equalise wealth is through higher taxation, but progressive taxation. I think also that we should get rid of taxes that hit the poorest in society, like the VAT, for example, which predominantly hit the poorest in society. So absolutely I agree that we should increase taxation, and absolutely we need to get rid of everything like the bedroom tax as well.
Okay, and Linda?
I think, yes, we do need to increase taxation. Another thing I would like to see is increasing wages for the poorest people. They keep going on about how you have to make work pay. Well, we can make work pay by increasing wages for the people on very, very low wage. I think when you look at the FTSE 100, the average executive pay in the top 100 companies in the FTSE 100 is £4 million. That's the average salary. So yes, I think it's time we started taxing the rich a little bit more.
Okay, I'm going to, Michael and Mary will have a chance to say something about this as well, but I just want to bring in the further question about the Constitution as well, and what sort of Constitution I suppose you'd like to see, or why that might be an important thing. We'll start with Sean.
Well, I would actually like to lightly comment on both, if that's okay. In terms of tax and welfare, I suppose part of me is probably just going to get lynched by saying this. I actually think that tax should be equal, if that makes sense. If I earn less, fair enough, I'm obviously not going to be paying as much, but it should be equal across the board. But if you have more money, then in theory you're paying more tax. In terms of welfare, women are unproportionately affected by the welfare cuts that have gone through, and it's, I mean, in general, they're more likely to be the carers in the household. They're more likely to be in low-paid employment, so they've been the worst affected by these welfare cuts. I'd absolutely hope. And I know that the current Scottish Government have pledged that they would cancel out the bedroom tax. In terms of the Constitution, absolutely, we need a written Constitution, not just for women, but yeah, for women, for the LGBT community, for everybody in Scotland. A written Constitution, I think, is one of the first things that should be getting looked at. And I would absolutely honestly hope that it was a secular, I'd hope there was that everybody's religion was equal in this country, and those who don't have a religion. So I would like to keep religion out of the... Everyone gets the right to religion, but that it's not written in the Constitution.
Okay, I mean, Mary, obviously a Constitution can be a document that takes us forward, but is a Constitution enough? I mean, you can say a lot of nice things in a Constitution, but is it enough to actually deliver the sort of things that we're talking about, increase of tax, getting rid of the trade union laws and so on and so forth?
I think there's almost a... Sorry, I'll use yours. There's a... Can you sing?
A little bit,
yeah. There's a fundamental misunderstanding, I think, about what really a constitution is and what it's for, and I think it's tremendously important. And I think it's tremendously important, in my view, even before we have the referendum. I think we should be having a draft in place, ready to be discussed and agreed by everyone now. Because a constitution goes way beyond something for politicians to base laws upon. A constitution is the framework on which you base your whole society. Now, it should be something that is adaptable, because times change and circumstances changed, but fundamentally the principles that a good constitution enshrine ought to be there from the outset. And furthermore, the constitution doesn't need to be as complex as people who don't believe in a written constitution believe. A constitution should be something that I can pick up, not a lawyer, just with a decent level of intelligence and nous, and read it and know what it means are my rights, know what it means are the mechanisms by which I will be governed, and how my democracy will operate. Now, politics and what politicians then do, democratically elected, with power, under the terms and within the framework of that constitution, are then what will make the changes that we want. I really have to comment on the business of tax. I'm really sorry, but I think it's terrifically important, because I do believe in progressive taxation. I don't agree with you in the flat level, because I think that the gap between the rich and the poor is tremendously important. I think it's obscene. Now, I'm a co-operator, and so, of course, I'll refer to Mondragon, the cooperative in Spain, and actually which operates internationally now. The people who are at the very top are not permitted to earn more than 10 times the lowest paid worker. And if you look at that, and you look even in terms of our current local authorities here in Scotland, there are many chief executives who are earning more than 10 times what the people who clean the buildings in which they work are earning. And that's a disgrace. And when you have a system which changes that, taxes the people at the top progressively and more than the people that are at the bottom, it's a good way of generating revenue, and it's a good way of ensuring that that gap is less. I wouldn't do it until the pips squeak, because I do think that there should be inducements for people who are earning larger amounts than the average to actually be able to give it and invest it and do good things with it in things that the state either does not want to do or is unable to do. I could go on forever about the Constitution, because I've become interested in terms of religion. I do Facebook a lot. And I know I've got some Facebook friends here, because I've seen them. I've never. Hello. The worst. 2 nights ago, I put on a post which was about the soldiers who were invited to the Rangers game against, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't an Old Firm game. It wasn't Celtic. And the soldiers were filmed singing sectarian songs. It is the scourge of Scotland. And if there is anything in our constitution at all, our secular constitution, it should be something which takes steps in the constitution to get rid of that sectarianism, because it really is divisive, it's bitter, it's corrosive, and it's really, really nasty.
I mean, Michael, you are part of the National Collective, which is a big grassroots movement of artists and creatives, and have had a huge impact on the referendum process so far. But I suppose my question is that, do we all pack up and go home if we win a yes vote? How are we going to make sure that we win the things that we've been talking about throughout this referendum? I mean, is it something that can just be delivered from on high, or are we going to need to build that momentum from the grassroots?
No, because I don't think there's any example in history of there being social progress without people fighting for it. But I think there's a great deal of optimism in Scotland for the referendum and beyond, and it's something that, you know, Jerry Hassan's written a few articles recently about it, trying to describe what's happening. Because you've got here like the Radical Independence Conference, you've got the Common Weal, you've got Women for Independence, you've got National Collective, you've got lots of new grassroots organisations springing up in Scotland around the referendum. And it's like a new democratic wave of engagement in politics. And I think that's going to outlast the referendum. And I think it should give us a lot of hope. And it's not totally unrelated to the question about tax and the Constitution. Because the Constitution itself doesn't only represent, you know, your rights and enshrine your liberties, but it actually defines and distributes power. And I think we can be far more imaginative about how that Constitution can be constructed. If you look at the Constitutional Convention that was held in Iceland recently, or the Constitutional Convention that's ongoing in Ireland, it's not decided by politicians or from on high by civic organisations. It's made up by ballot of citizens, selected at random, like Republican democracy should be. And one, perhaps, ambitious proposal for a Scottish constitution would be that the second chamber of an independent Scotland would be composed not of the high and mighty, not of the rich, not of the powerful, not of the B-list candidates from our main political parties, but by citizens. And you could have a citizens' assembly, a people's assembly, that is selected every 3 months on rotation, and the people would be in charge of making the laws. And I think if you had a country like that, where the majority of people had real influence on the legislative process, the country would change dramatically in a very short space of time.
Okay, I'm going to take one last round of questions and then we're going to have a break if that's okay with people. But before I ask for more questions, I mean, is there anyone here that is definitely voting no? I was just going to offer you the opportunity to put forward your arguments there, but okay, I can see 2 hands, which I'll take both at the same time. It's quite a stretch just over there.
Okay, I just wanted to make the point, as a religious person and who's in favour of an independent Scotland, there's certainly no basis for any religion to have any privileges, I think, in an independent Scotland, and nor should any religion be granted status, in my view, in an independent Scotland. It's very important that we distinguish between religion and bigotry. You know, it's quite offensive to me to see those two things being just run together. You know, what happened to Ibrox the other day was totally unacceptable. Religious bigotry of all types is totally unacceptable, but you know, I think the churches could have a very valuable role to play in encouraging debate on hopefully the road to independence and being part of the discussions, but without having without having a privileged place in their society, but neither should they have a no place.
Okay, and one more question up the back.
I can shout. That'll be helpful. It's probably shouting. The panel may be aware that the socialist critique from the unionist side that we've heard about independence is primarily from the Red Paper Collective, who've argued that Scottish independence won't help us to address a battle with capital across the United Kingdom, and essentially that being pro-independence is a fantasy which doesn't really address that. I wonder, what's the panel's argument from the left about why Scottish independence addresses the power of capital contra to the Red Paper Collective argument that we've heard?
Okay, well, I'll take those questions together and put them to the panel. Pete, you've just finished a book on the socialist case for a yes vote, so counter the Red Paper Collective right now in 2 minutes.
That's quite hard. That's quite a tall order. Where would I start? Okay. Yes, it's not the case. I would agree that it's not the case that Scottish independence automatically equals socialism. Of course not. Absolutely not. Independence could be simply just changing the flag. Absolutely. I mean, and that would ultimately result in absolutely no change in society whatsoever. That is one possibility. However, I think that we've also got to say that staying part of Britain certainly isn't going to result in much change. I mean, I'd like to ask everyone a question. Do you think that things are going to get radically better if we stay as part of the UK? Now, I've asked that question to a lot of people who are against independence as well, and the answer is generally always the same: no. No, we don't. In my opinion, what independence is about is it gives us all an opportunity to ask a question, which is, what sort of society do we want to live in? Now, for me, that's a society in which we redistribute wealth. Having said that, I'm sure that you could ask some people who lead multi-million-pound businesses and so on, who might say that they want an independent Scotland which lowers corporation tax. I don't personally, but some people will say that. What I think is that ultimately, look, independence doesn't equal socialism. What it does is it creates a massive debate within our society. And in my opinion, the vast majority of people in Scotland do want to live in a better sort of society, a more progressive society, a society in which we do redistribute wealth, a society in which we don't allow the level of inequality to reach quite almost Victorian standards. And so the question is, what do we all do? I think it comes back to the question that was asked previously as well, which is, do we all stop after 2014? And of course, I think the answer is no. I think the point of independence, and for me, the point of the independence debate and the independence movement is to start asking fundamental questions about society. And that allows all of us to do that. We can't leave it to the politicians. It has to be a genuine grassroots discussion and debate. Will it automatically equal a better society? I would say it probably will result in a better society, but not necessarily. Only if we make sure that it results in a better society, that can ultimately lead to social change. But as I say, the ultimate thing is that if we stay part of the UK, it won't. I just want to give you one fact to sum this up, right? Because to me, I think the question of the environment is not just a question for Scotland, it's a question for all of us, but we all have a part to play in it. Some people say that we need to reduce our climate, our emissions by 90% by 2030 if we're going to have any chance of averting the climate crisis. Now, according to Ernst & Young, it's going to take £450 billion worth of expenditure by 2025 on a UK level to just meet our climate change targets. Now, at the moment, what's been going to be provided by the private sector is 50 to 80 billion. That leaves £400 billion worth of a black hole. How are we going to meet that? Under the UK system, the markets, which, let's be honest, the UK champions, are not going to provide that £400 billion. So we have to ask ourselves a question, which is how are we going to come up with that money? I think there's one obvious answer, which is state-led investment into green technology. Now, independence offers us the opportunity to raise this debate. We need to be part of a global movement which tackles climate change. And the UK is currently one of the worst polluters. It's one of the worst states which is not tackling climate change. So, in my opinion, I'm voting for yes for independence because I want to be able to raise these sorts of debates, and I want Scotland to have a global role in tackling these sorts of issues. And I think an independent Scotland will. I think an independent Scotland will break from the militarist strategy of the UK that the UK has pursued for years. I think it will pursue a far more progressive role on the world stage.
I'm going to bring Mary in again. One of the things I think we'll see if we get a yes vote is not just a mobilisation from our side, but a mobilisation of corporate interest, the corporate interest which currently surrounds Westminster. Now, when we get independence and when the corporations do move into Edinburgh, set up camp and surround the Scottish Parliament, as they currently do with Westminster, how do we respond to that?
Well, that's not the question I'm going to address. However, on the subject of the socialist critique provided by the Red Paper Collective, I would like to think about that for a bit, because I agree with every word that Pete spoke there, that we are not going to, by having independence, deliver, certainly not immediately, the kind of socialist Scotland I would want. For starters, I'm not Stalinist enough to believe that it is possible to have one country, however fine that country is, in a world of global capitalism, which is has a socialist economy. However, I do think it's important that a country which might be moving in that direction and wanting that and making the kind of laws and proving that socialism can work could help to lead the way. At the moment, we have the whole capitalist stuff is now worldwide. The Soviet Union was terribly, terribly flawed and did a tremendous amount of damage to the ideals of both socialism and communism because of its human rights record, because of some of the ways in which it operated, and because it was so centralised. But nevertheless, it was there as the living proof that there were other ways, whether they worked or not, that there was something that could be adapted and aspired to. When it went, then capitalism became the thing to which there was no alternative. Now, I think Scotland could start building something that was an alternative to the way that the current UK is done, and I think that that would benefit socialists in the other parts of the UK. The other thing I would say is that the Red Paper Collective hasn't recognised that with centralisation, such as we have in London, both the power and the wealth go from the places where they're actually generated to where the power and the wealth are centred. And that is asocialist. That is a block on the route to socialism. And even when we have an independent Scotland, one of the things I think we'll have to be very careful of is that we don't just have the kind of centralised power and wealth in Scotland that currently we have in the UK. And that's a much wider discussion, probably not time to answer it in this question.
Okay, I'm just going to take any brief comments then. I'll start with Linda.
I was just going to make the point about centralisation, which Mary has just made for us. If we got an independent Scotland and we got a community that was centred around the central belt, a kind of mini Westminster, I would be absolutely horrified. So we have to make sure that we don't get that centralist kind of society. And when you get that centralist society, people don't feel engaged, people don't feel empowered, and so you get the low turnouts that we get at our elections. You get people who think, oh, what's the point? And we have this groundswell at the moment of everybody being interested in it and people starting to debate in it, and we need to keep that going. We need to keep the involvement going, and the way that we do that is to devolve power out to the communities and not to have a centralist society.
Okay. Anything to add by any?
Sorry, I'll actually just throw a wee thing in here. Two wee things, sorry. Firstly, I'm not quite as eloquent as the rest of the panel, but one of the things that bugs me about when the UK-wide socialists come out and say, oh, after a no vote, don't worry, we'll make everything better, here's a plan. We've had the UK for 300 years. Why is the plan only now came out? Do you know what I mean? So that's what bugs me about when they say that. The last wee thing I was going to say, which kind of brings us back to the kind of title of this section, which was 2E, in terms of like the lobbyists, etc. One of the good things about being a small country is that the access for normal people is actually to our politicians and to kind of all parts of society is a lot easier. You hear the difference of people talking about the access to your politicians, the access to Westminster in comparison to the access to the Scottish Parliament. Being a smaller country means that it's easier to get to these people. So although that in theory makes it easier for the corporations to do so, it makes it easier for us to make sure they're answering to us as well. So.
Okay, yes, clap.